All right. Well, welcome everybody. Hey, my name is Mike Demaro. Just wanted to recap a conversation that we had, I guess, about a month ago. So if you weren't able to attend, we had a pretty awesome event here at the church during student ministry on Sunday night. We had a few ladies come out, and we talked about what it looks like to raise kids in a digital world. We know that there's challenges. I don't think that comes as any surprise to anyone. But this really was, I think, an important conversation, and it was a conversation. We had about 75 people there. We packed the room out, the small room we had, and I had probably a dozen people come up to me afterwards and say, man, I wish I would have recorded this because so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so needs to hear this. And, I just heard that countless times. So that's what we're here. We're here to have the same conversation, but what we're hoping to do is just kind of get this conversation out, into the airwaves so that more people can hear from you ladies. So why don't we go ahead and start with introductions? So please. I'm
Angel Myers-McElrath. I'm the district attorney for Jackson, George, and Greene counties, and a member here at the church.
Awesome. Thanks for being here, Angel. Awesome.
I'm Olivia Smith. I'm an 8th grade English teacher at Ocean Springs Middle School and also a member of Mosaic.
Teacher of the year. I'm just saying.
I don't like to throw that out there. Just a teacher.
And I am Cecilia Ballard. I own Creative Connections Counseling and Consulting here in Ocean Springs, and I am also a member of Mosaic Church.
Awesome. So we have a great panel here. I mean, honestly, like if I'm a parent and I'm like wanting to get, a one-stop shop of all things, I've got somebody who can speak into the legal law enforcement side of things, somebody who's boots on the ground, if you will, who is in our schools and teaching. And then, Cece obviously doing an amazing job with counseling kids in the community. I'm excited about this conversation. Want to just clearly kind of remind us all, the purpose of this conversation is not to scare parents to death and say, hey, you need to walk into your kid's room, turn off the Wi-Fi, throw away the Xbox, throw away the iPhone. I'm sure Angel's over here saying, yeah, that's what they need to do.
I want to scare you.
But, that's not our goal. However, I think we would be really... We would regret it if we did not take some time to really talk about the real challenges that are out there. Scripture tells us that a wise person sees danger and they take refuge. They seek shelter, but a fool sees that danger and just keeps running toward it, and then they suffer. And that's what we want to do. So, Angel, I want to kick it off with you. I think that most parents would definitely agree that there's a lot of social media platforms out there that can really cause problems. But from a law enforcement perspective, talk to us about some of the challenges that you're seeing with kids regarding not just social media, but just digital devices in general.
Sure. Absolutely. So every single crime that we have involving the sexual abuse or exploitation of a child has a digital footprint. Mm-hmm. And so, from my standpoint, I tell parents, would you open the front door to your house and let anybody come in and spend time with your children? Because that's what you do when you give them a device that can access the internet. Yeah. And so we have to be so careful and so diligent and just in our children's Kool-Aid and really know what's going on. So we're seeing cyberbullying, and that's gone up since COVID. Mm-hmm. There's statistics that support an increase there. Children are exposed to things earlier. I get calls from, I had a call from a parent who said, my 11-year-old shared a naked picture. I need you to get it back. And I can't get it back, And so we're seeing younger and younger exposure to sexual content online and cyberbullying.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, it's sobering to think, and what's amazing is something that you said there is just that exposure, that word, to really explicit information. And I think that that's always been a challenge. I mean, even, for century, there's been, explicit material out there and people have been exposed to it, but it's how easy it is to get access to that stuff. And the age. I mean, it's startling to me to think that kids that age are seeing these things that are really manipulating and reshaping the way their brain thinks about, intimacy and things like that. It could definitely be a dangerous path. So Angel, obviously we understand that there's danger. I don't think anyone would argue that, but what do you think, like if I'm a parent and I'm saying, okay, you're telling me that I need to be in their Kool-Aid per se, what are those things that if I grab my kid's phone or I start looking through it, or I just notice behavior, like what are some red flags that as a parent that I need to be kind of watching out for?
Okay. So the first thing I would say is in order to identify a red flag with your child, you've really got to know your kid because kids are going through life changes. They're moody. They're all the things, right? And there's an overlap between the red flags and what could be potentially normal behavior. So you got to know your kid. But if withdrawal, not enjoying things that they used to enjoy, being very secretive, you walk in the room and the phone's hidden or the monitor goes off. They're not, hanging out with the same people. Right. They're, angry or sad or sleeping more. Their grades are falling. Those are some things. Another red flag, and I didn't mention it last time, is your kid's got stuff they shouldn't have. So they've got money they shouldn't have. They've got new whatever that they shouldn't have, without any explanation of really how they got it. Yeah. And those are some of the red flags I would say to watch for your kids. But as far as being in their Kool-Aid, you need to be able to pick up any device at any time and access it. Half of the students that were interviewed for a study said that their parents did not know how to or did not have access to their online activities. And so you've just got to be random and in their business, looking at what they've got, really engaged with your kids. When I was growing up and Mama was tired, she put a movie, a little VHS in, and we watched that. Right. Now your kid has access to the world and the world has access to your kid while you're making dinner. Wow. Right. And so you've just got to be more involved, more diligent. Yeah.
And I think you hit the nail on the head there where, we have to create a culture. I say this all the time. I don't think I got everything right, obviously, as a parent. I have teenagers. But one thing I do feel like, hey, we kind of got this right was the day that I gave them their first phone, iPad, whatever. I made it perfectly clear that there is no such thing as privacy. This is my phone, and now, I've got a 17-year-old daughter. Now, yes, she rolls her eyes at me really hardcore whenever I'm doing it, but she knows that once every week or two, I'm going to grab her phone. That's right. And, and I tell her, I was like, if your friends are texting you anything, you better make sure they know that, like, I'm going to be looking at this, right? Yeah. So, and praise God. I think that trust that we've had from a really young age, that we have kind of built has created an environment where I'm not really worried about my kids on these digital devices. Again, I'm not saying that couldn't change tomorrow, but I'm saying that up to this point, I feel like we set that bar and that standard day one, that like this whole concept of, and I hear it all the time from parents, like, well, I don't want to betray their,
I got to respect
my kids'
I got to
respect it. No. Right. Yeah. Like I would just say
there's nothing private.
Exactly. You have been put in that child's life by God to raise them, to protect them. And to train them in the way that they should go. And privacy is not one of those things. Right.
Right. And Angel, it's interesting you bring that up because I have a 2-year-old daughter, and even on YouTube, which isn't necessarily, I guess you could claim that as social media, but even some of like the YouTube videos that originally should be like Peppa Pig, well, people have twisted it to be inappropriate things. And so we've done away with YouTube. Like we don't have YouTube in our house, other than like if my husband's watching like a music video or something on his own phone. But it's crazy at an early age, like that should be for 2-3-year-olds that you have to worry about predators.
And they know how to get on and watch it by themselves. Anyway, they can get your iPad and they know what to do very young,
Yeah, it's incredible. So Angel, I'll share a story. I didn't really share this last time, but I was in a situation once where I had an overzealous parent that found some inappropriate, content, photos, nothing explicit, but it was definitely inappropriate, of another teenage girl that didn't happen to be her daughter. And her I don't know what she was thinking, but she decided, hey, let me go ahead and send these pictures to Mike because he's her youth pastor.
Oh,
Yeah.
So here I am sitting at my desk one day, got a text from somebody with all these photos, that I considered to be inappropriate. Again, nothing explicit, but very inappropriate. And it kind of took me back. I'm like, what
Right.
in the world? Like, why would this person send that to me? And I'm not saying that to just, say it for no reason. What I'm saying is I'm sure that there are people that are in that situation where it's like somebody sends you something and you're like, what am I supposed to do with this? So talk to parents and like, if we suspect that our kids, if we see something that is, maybe pushing that boundary of absolutely explicit, inappropriate, maybe even illegal. Like if I'm a parent and I discover that, okay, my kid is into something here and this is a problem, what are some resources or what is some advice that you would give that parent? Like, how do I handle that?
Okay. So I know this sounds silly, but the first thing is you need to stay calm.
Yeah.
Because our children feed off of our energy, our responses, our emotions. So that's the very first thing I would say. Depending on the situation will depend on how you act. Okay. Yeah. So if it's cyberbullying, if it's, something that is clearly not criminal but is inappropriate, you're going to want to talk to the school counselor, the other kid, if there's another kid involved. Communication's key. If it's images that they shouldn't have but are not like sexually explicit images, that just, it needs to be deleted and you need to let the parents know. Now, if it is something criminal, so if it's an adult involving a child or any kind of image of sexually explicit conduct or the simulation of it, that is on my end of the spectrum.
Right.
Okay. And so that's something you've got to report it.
Right.
And it's really scary because, we don't have a rule book. We don't have a toolkit. We don't know what to do. And how serious these kind of things are. Like, this is life-changing if you make that allegation, right? But what I would tell you is you've just got to do it, do not put your head in the sand. Certainly don't share anything, right? So if you find something on your kid's phone, don't share it. Don't send it to Joe's mom and say, hey, Joe sent this to my daughter. Don't do that.
Right.
Because once it's out there, whether you sent it or somebody else sent it.
Right.
And so, just be smart. And look, my office is available anytime. If somebody's in a situation where they don't know what to do, call my office, 228-769-3045. And we'll walk you through the steps that you need to take.
Now, you mentioned during our live panel that we're obligated by law to report those things. It's not you need to report it like you have a moral obligation. Like I think you referred to it as mandatory reporters.
Right.
Explain that a little bit.
Well, there's a law in Mississippi that identifies certain individuals as mandatory reporters, and they make it a crime if you don't report. And so it's teachers, counselors, things like that. Caretakers described in the statute, but it's not explicitly listed. But I just tell everybody you're a mandatory reporter.
Yeah.
And you are subject to prosecution if you conceal abuse. If you don't, it's very tread carefully, kind of thing. Don't take any chances.
Right.
And it's bigger than you. It's
Absolutely.
bigger than your uncomfortable feeling. It's you've got to do something about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like I need to close my story out because I want everyone to know those pictures were immediately
We're getting
deleted.
your phone out.
And immediately deleted. I contacted the parent that sent it and said, please don't do that anymore. And then, I went to both of my bosses and said, hey, I just want to let you know this just happened, because I did not want to be in that situation.
You don't know what to do.
Right.
And parents, you become desperate.
Right.
You don't know how to handle something. And sometimes we act out of desperation. And so that's why I say, take a breath,
right.
Stay calm and, cool-headed about things, and, you'll be guided on what to do.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for
you.
that insight. So, Cece, we're going to kind of turn to you now. So, outside of some of these dangers that Angel obviously, showed us, and I think parents are probably aware of it, but maybe not to the extent that have we really thought about. I loved what you said, that it's like, it's not only us giving our kids access to the outside world, you're giving the world access to your kid.
That's right.
And I mean, that's such a great, kind of perspective to have. But outside of some of these dangers, can you talk to us a little bit about the emotional impacts of kids that you're seeing on social media, maybe device addiction or, whatever that looks like? Talk to us about this correlation, because I keep hearing that there is a link to increased anxiety in teens and social media. Can you kind of just talk about that a little bit?
Yes. One thing that I see a lot of is that kids want and need validation. And as hard as we work as parents, trying to validate them and let them know who they are and how much they're loved, it's important to get that sense of validation from peers. It's important to be a part of a group. You mentioned culture earlier. Right. We have a culture in our homes, but there are also cultures within their schools, within neighborhoods that kids want to fit in. And what I see is that there is an increase. The anxiety that I see in kids that I work with stems from wanting to be accepted and wanting to be loved, in essence, by their peers in some way, even if it means jeopardizing who they are within their homes.
Right.
What I see as an important factor with kind of, I guess, alleviating or lowering those, I guess, standards with kids is really making who they are, prioritizing who they are as early as 2 years old, and allowing them to have that voice to express who they are and what their needs are within the home, so that when they become a part of these peer groups, they can actually present who they are and be proud of who they are, not in a sinful way, but just be okay with who they are, so that they see that there are actually people that can accept them for who they are and love them for who they are. So creating that culture within the home that says, hey, who you are is okay, and other people can respect you for who you are, is more important than trying to conform to those things that you see in the world. Let's be a world changer instead of conforming.
Yeah. It's amazing to me. Like, I've seen a lot of teenagers, especially like, our younger kind of middle school, maybe early high school. It's unbelievable to me. Like, I've asked kids, like, hey, I need you to put your phone away. And I mean, it's like, but somebody sent me a Snapchat or somebody sent me a text, and it's like, there is so much pressure for them to, like, if you don't reply to that, it's like you are dissing somebody if you don't. Do you experience that in the middle? Like,
absolutely.
Talk to us about that a little bit.
They will constantly need to check their phone just to be like, keep up with their streaks, or post on, I forget what the new one, like their Be Real, like you have to post every day. And even I've had students want to show me like a video or a picture on their phone, and then they're like, wait, don't open it. Like, if you open it, then like I lose my streaks. I'm like, I don't even know what that means, but like, I'm not clicking through your stuff. Like, what? Right. But it's just that constant, like, even as a teacher, if I'm like, hey, look, put your phone away. Like, they'll have their phone on their desk. Well, I'm just waiting for this. And it's like, you'll be okay for 55 minutes. Like, it's 55 minutes in a class. Like, just put your phone away. But I think it falls, like with what Cece said, that validation. Like, how many likes or how many views or all the stuff falls into what they deem as their worth.
Yeah. And I think that all really comes down to identity. That's something that as a student ministry, we have really spent, honestly, years, constantly bringing this theme of identity up to our teens. And it's like, you are not who social media says you are. You're not who your friends say. You're not even who your parents say you are. You are who God says you are. And I think that the earlier that we can get kids to embrace that, to know that, to feel confident in their own skin, then when we put a device in their hand, they're not going to be worried about getting that validation from all these, frankly, meaningless and empty platforms. So great stuff there. Cece, let's talk a little more about, like, we talked about this concept of addiction. And I mean, I see it. I see it in this church. I see people that, like, kids, even during student ministry sermons, it's like you said, they cannot just put their phone away for 15 minutes, because it's like the end of the world to them. But if we're a parent and we have recognized, like, maybe I'm listening to this podcast, I'm like, okay, my kid's got a problem. and like, there's clearly an addiction. Maybe it's video games, maybe it's just YouTube,
Right.
whatever it is. Like, how do you navigate that? Like, how do you walk that back in a healthy way, as a parent? Because, just like you said, you kind of have to tread lightly sometimes. You can't just go in there, with a bat and start smashing everything.
Right.
Like, even though you probably feel like it sometimes, right? But I mean, so how do you handle that?
Well, one thing that I look at is the root of the problem. We live in a world where life gets really, really busy. So sometimes, I'm going to say a lot of times, the root of the problem stems from us as parents not giving enough attention to some of those factors. As parents, we put in a lot of hours at work. Everything is just rush. And sometimes we don't take that time out to pause and focus on the kids, or like at the dinner table, take time out to have just meaningful conversations, or just be intentional about what we do to create the atmosphere that does not involve social media. So getting to the root of the problem and looking at maybe why our kids have that access. Sometimes we need to just have structured evenings, structured moments that, okay, it's okay to access social media that is approved by the parent, and there are moments where you just need to unplug. We all need to unplug because as parents, we probably need to model some of the things that we're expecting of our kids. No, we don't go to the sites. We have that self-control to not to be pulled in or influenced, but we have to allow them to see us model the behaviors that we're expecting of them. And it's not a, being friends with them, do as I say sort of generation that we have. We have to show them that there is, we can do what we're asking of them. I get that question a lot from my 15-year-old, like, well, Mom, I've seen you do this, and it's not, some parents just don't allow that. I allow that because that creates a discussion. I have to share with them, I am at 40 plus years old,
and Mom has a job.
I have a job, and I sometimes say, hey, let's look at how much life I have in comparison to yours. But then sometimes I say, you know what, I understand. I see why it's important to you for me to model it, but I also want you to know that God has commissioned me to be your overseer, and it's my responsibility to make sure your life is as healthy as possible. So having those discussions, not just saying because I said so, or not just saying because, whatever your because is, but having a true reason for it. And like when I give those explanations, even though it feels somewhat challenging, I find that my child can accept it and process it and respect it. And it's this dynamic that I can appreciate, that number one, I've allowed him the opportunity to come to me and speak his mind in a respectful way. And on the other hand, I leave that conversation believing that he's going to respect what I'm saying. Another thing that I wanted to just offer is a social media plan, an agreement that you and your child have created together that allows there to be a clear understanding of some parameters that social media is used, and give them that opportunity to give some input. It might be that parents, in the last one, you gave a very good example of, social media platforms where they create
those fake accounts.
Yes. So that might be a part of the agreement that, you don't create fake accounts. If I find that you do, then these are the consequences of it. So just being very clear on what the boundaries are on social media use needs to be a discussion.
And you mentioned the word intentionality a couple of times, being intentional, because I really think that's the key. I mean, nobody's ever accidentally raised a great kid. Nobody ever accidentally has a great marriage. Like, you have to work at it. It takes intentionality. It cannot be passive. I would always say too, there have been many times I've talked to parents and I'm like, hey, you need to put time limits on certain apps and things like that. And they're like, well, I don't know how to do that. Let me tell you this right now, parents. If your kid is smarter than you on that device, you got a problem, because I'm going to tell you that they're always going to find a way around it that you don't even know. And, you know, and we're going to talk about this a little more as we wrap it up. But, you know, we can put all the different tools and you know, time limits and restrictions on these things all we want. I've done this to my son's phone several times. I put time, because he can go in a deep dive in YouTube videos. So I've set time limits. Well, every time there's a major software update, guess what? It all disappears and reverts to the original. And it's like, you know, 3 weeks goes by and I'm like, dude, what is going on? How are you watching this much YouTube? I set limits. They go away. There's always going to be, so it really is, you've got to be present. You have to be intentional. I love the idea of having that covenant, having that like, hey, this is how we conduct ourselves on social media. If you violate this, we got problems, you know, it's simple as that. Then it's just like, that's termination of that account or whatever. And yeah, absolutely. I've heard a lot about the fake, you know, kind of they called it, you know, back when Instagram was the main thing, it was a Finstagram. It was like this, you know, it was this concept that, hey, there's my Instagram account that my parents and everybody sees, and I let grandma, you know, follow it. But then there's the one where I post all the stuff I don't want them to see. And it's just, you got to know how to look out for that, parents. And the only way you can do that is honestly just really staying engaged and understanding the technology. Like, if you don't understand that phone as well as your kid, you need to do your homework.
I want to add, when Cece talked about boundaries, I think it's a good idea for parents of the peer group to get together and have collective boundaries. Because if one child has these and another child has another, and, you know, they're going to each other's houses, you know, it takes a village. And that group parenting to set boundaries for, you know, our kids are allowed to do this and we're all going to respect it. It also helps the children, because they're not like, well, so-and-so, when I'm at so-and-so's house, they can do this and they can do that. They all know here's what the rule is, you know? And so I think that's a good idea.
Great. Yeah, absolutely. This way they're also feeling like, man, maybe my parents aren't so crazy after all, right?
Right.
Oh, you mean there's other parents that, like, you know, have these, you know, restrictions and, you know, different, you know, kind of boundaries. Yeah, absolutely. So
there was something you mentioned also, I think, in the last meeting that I thought was important, just being intentional about coming together face to face. That eliminates some of the social media usage.
Right.
I actually had a sleepover for my teenager. I was like, look, a play date for teenagers. It went really well to hear wholesome talk.
Right.
And yes, there was girl talk, but there was healthy talk about parents and, you know, think
it was
positive
conversation.
Things. Yes. And I think they
weren't
lose
texting
that.
each other in the same room.
Now, were there phones? Yes. But I heard very good, healthy conversation that made me feel good and know that, you know, we do have kids that will do some of the things that we had to do growing up if we created the opportunity.
And they enjoy it. Exactly. Like, that's the thing, is like they enjoy it when you kind of force those things on them. So I think that's great. So Olivia, I want to talk to you a little bit. Obviously, you know, like I made the reference, you're kind of our boots on the ground. You're surrounded by, you know, 1,000 or so middle school students. So, you know, as a middle school teacher, I would love for you to just kind of talk, and you kind of already briefly mentioned this, but how have you kind of seen social media and digital devices just kind of change like the social structure? Because I mean, I think back to my years in middle school. It's like you had a couple of crowds you could run with. You were either the athletes or you know, or the, you know,
much like the jocks versus the geeky kids.
It was just, and then you had the weird, you know, like, I mean, there was a couple of different tribes, but like it really seems like it's all changed.
It's all changed, 100%.
So, like, talk to us about that.
It's no longer like, and I mean, I graduated high school in 2011, and I think just within I know, but just within,
all of us just felt really old.
I feel very old. In those like 20 years, it's changed so much, and sometimes I'm like, wow, has it really been like that long? But it really is different. It doesn't really matter your sport team that you play for or your group that you're with. When it comes to like social media, it's like they will friend anyone essentially. Wow. And there's, of course, we know dangers with that. But I think the dynamic, like we've already kind of mentioned, just those streaks and keeping up with each other through social media. And so I love, Cece, that you created that environment for your son to have friends come over face to face, because I think in today's time and age, a lot of times they forget how to just be kids, like how to play, how to even if it is video games, like how to play together, how to hang out, have a sleepover without it being through a phone, because it's really easy for kids to say mean things to each other through a device. I think even for adults too, it's easy for someone to say something mean or hurtful, but they would never say those things if they were given that environment face to face. They'd be like, wait, I don't want to say that and hurt someone's feelings. But in the moment, they're so quick to just send it right out.
It's amazing.
And they're lonely.
Yes,
you'll be lonely in a room
100%.
full of people if your communications are just on social media, and you don't know how to interact with people. So,
Yeah.
Absolutely. Talk to us a little bit, what are some of the, you kind of mentioned it again already, but like, what are the challenges that as a teacher that these devices are just, creating for you guys? Like, what are those, distractions?
The main thing now I feel like is their AirPods. Like it's that constant and it's like a school rule where if you see them, you tell them put it away or confiscate it. Yeah. But it connects to their phones, and so they don't realize of like, if I'm trying to teach you and you have your AirPods in, that's disrespectful. Like you don't hear
They're
what I'm
binging some TV show on Netflix.
Exactly. Right? They're like, please, when like the World Cup was on a couple of years ago, that's all they had to watch. But even with their phones, and I hate to throw out the word like entitlement, but it really is like, this is my device. Like you are not going to tell me what I can do with my phone. Right. And on the flip side too, I think a lot of times parents feel that way towards teachers of like, how dare you tell my kid to put their phone away or do that? Wow. And I think when teachers and parents are on the same page of like, hey, we're both just trying to get your kid to grow into not just educationally, but we want them to be kind people. We want them to express themselves and all of those things. But when we're on the same page of like, I'm not coming from a place of like, I'm the mean, bad teacher telling you to put your phone away. But at 13 and 14 years old, and I think it was UCC that mentioned the respect aspect. Yeah. I really do believe that, like, they don't respect me because I'm an adult. They respect me because it's mutual respect. And, like, hey, look, I respect the fact that you're here, you're showing up, you're trying, you're putting in the work. Just like you respect the fact that I'm not chewing your head off if your phone's on your desk. Like, hey, just put your phone away. Like, it doesn't always have to be a battle, I think, a lot of times. But there are, of course, kids that do push it. It's right. Hey, you told me to. Well, I'm still going to try to sneak it, or I'm still going to try to do it. But I think that's the biggest issue is, just that sense of entitlement. And then when we do have that parent support, it just makes everything so much easier of like, hey, we're on the same team. Our goal is the same. So yeah.
I could imagine it's fun in the halls of a middle school. It's
interesting.
I was watching a documentary. It's on Netflix. It's called The Social Dilemma. Yeah. I would recommend if you have access to Netflix, check that out because it's a mind-blowing documentary because what it is, it's former executives at Pinterest, Google, Twitter, Facebook, you name it. And I'm not talking like entry-level employees. I'm talking some of these guys were like the CFOs. I mean, but they've actually left because they started figuring out, well, I mean, it wasn't even something that they were trying to hide, that there are literally scientists out there that are hired to develop color patterns and graphics and motions that are literally more addictive. Mm-hmm. Every time you pick up a phone, you're getting a hit of dopamine.
Right.
I mean, literally, like you're getting jacked up, and it's this false sense of joy and happiness and euphoria, and it's meaningless. Right. And I mean, it's unbelievable. So we see that like kids, like you said, when you tell them to put those phones away in classrooms, like, well, we see why. Like,
and it's that instant gratification. And so often, I mean, then as an adult or as you grow, you realize like, wait, you're not going to instantly get what you want. Like you have to work for those things or it takes time and dedication. And so when they're like, oh, I instantly get a like, or I instantly get a follow, it like you said, that dopamine, it just boosts them up.
And it comes back to that validation too.
Right.
And, one of the points that's made in that documentary too, is that, it's like, I don't think the human brain is evolved enough to handle the level of comparison that these kids are playing in today's world. Like when I was in high school, I compared myself to, we all played the comparison game, the kids in the neighborhood, the kids in school, but now it's like millions.
Right.
Like there's always going to be somebody more talented, a better athlete, more pretty.
Right.
Like
And
I mean,
it's
it's
the
just
highlight reel. I mean,
It
nobody's
is.
putting the business. Well, some people put the business
Right.
out there.
but
We follow.
right.
We
Yeah.
follow you people. But you know, it's the highlight reel that they see,
Right.
And that is also, I think, damaging. That
Right.
you know, they have
Right.
these expectations just aren't real.
absolutely.
And in all aspects too, because I think back like when I was pregnant and a new mom with this newborn baby, and I'm like, online, like these moms that I follow, they're naturally good moms, and they're doing this, and they're not having this crying baby, and so it's constantly like, what am I doing wrong? But like you said, it's just those highlight reels, and
Right.
so as an adult, I have to realize this is not factual. Like,
Right.
and I do that too with my daughter sometimes. I can
Yeah.
post a picture of her smiling, but then she's throwing a
Yeah.
tantrum right after the picture. So it's
Yeah.
like, that's not reality.
Right.
See, I'm the opposite. I post all the pictures.
Right,
Yeah.
I post the tantrums too. I'm like, y'all, this
yeah.
is Instagram versus reality. Like,
Yeah, exactly.
This is probably
Yeah.
where I see the depressive
Yeah.
moments with the clients that I
Right.
work with. Just wanting to be seen in
Right.
a certain image, or seeing those images
Right.
out there and wanting the comparisons, and they don't know there's someone behind the scenes,
Right.
like Miguel here,
Yeah.
that
Right.
is working his magic
Right.
to create the image that everyone
Right.
sees.
right.
That's
And I mean, at the
absolutely
end of the day, it comes down to just the basic spiritual principle of the fact that
100%.
it's we are trying to elevate and glorify ourselves, and we are trying to get the eyes turned up rather than just falling down at the knees, or falling down on our knees at the foot of the
Right.
cross and saying, Jesus, like, you are all we need, you know. And it's like, that's the difference. It's all about us. It's not about us trying to glorify God. And I mean, I've even seen a lot of social media influencers like kind of pervert that and twist that. They're like, oh,
Right.
I'm doing this hashtag for God. And it's like, yes, but your
Right.
makeup and your hair and your, you know,
Right.
it's like, it's just
like,
like,
how did they get
it's-
that picture of
Right.
you?
It's the
Yeah.
same thing, you know, and
Yeah.
it's like, it really is. Where are you trying to get attention for yourself?
Right.
Because I've seen some kids, I mean, we've even got some teens here in the church that use social media in really great ways. Like they're
Right,
constantly,
yes.
I've got one kid that was doing a Bible study solely on social media. There were
love
kids
that.
all over the country,
That's so cool.
Right.
all over the country
That's
doing it.
amazing.
They got together and did Bible studies. And I mean, so there are great things that we can do with it, but it's, are you going to focus that attention on you, or are you going to focus it on,
Trying-
you know, reaching people for the kingdom? So,
Right.
yeah, absolutely. I think that, you know, it's important that we take some time too, to just take just a minute. I don't want to beat this drum for too long, but, you know, we mentioned the fact that exposure is a big issue. Now we're just going to go ahead and talk about it. We're going to talk about pornography. Okay. I know that, you know, I was exposed to pornography at a young age, and I know that did a lot of damage. I mean, I can probably still remember some of the images that, you know, they don't ever go away.
That's right.
And you know, I think it's really clear nowadays that people that are exposed, especially to this stuff that's out there, this really explicit, hardcore pornography, it can really pervert God's plan for what intimacy
Yes.
is supposed to look like. I mean, you know, you hear it all the time where you have people that have been married for 20, 30 years, and they ended up getting a divorce because of an addiction to pornography, because we have left ourselves wanting more than what God has given us, which is incredible. So I just want to throw out a couple of statistics out there, you know, that the largest pool of porn, you know, people who watch pornography or internet porn users is actually, the average age is about 12 to 17 is the biggest group of people. I mean, and that's scary. It's not just boys.
Right.
You know, it says that, you know, 70% of girls younger than the age of 18 have seen it at least once. 32% of teens admit to actively seeking it on a weekly basis. And it says that teen girls are even more likely to seek it out more than women that are 25 or older. So, I mean, it really is incredible. And we know that this is super, super damaging. Have you ever had any experience with teens that have dealt with that on a counselor's perspective? Like,
Yes.
unpack that a little bit for us.
Well, one thing, I've seen it, I've experienced it, meaning experienced it and having to face this challenge in my own home.
Yeah.
One thing I see in the kids that I've worked with, and I'll even say on that personal parental level, is I our kids are curious. Our kids are recognizing changes in their bodies, but our kids don't have the they don't have the words, or they don't
Right.
have the boldness to come to us and just kind of express or just have that conversation about it. So what I see is it starts off, it's not that our kids have these just very perverted minds,
Right.
but it starts off with curiosity, and they are recognizing changes, they're recognizing attractions, and they're going to the internet to find their answers. If we as adults, as parents, have these healthy conversations with our kids, go and just initiate it. Most of the kids that I work with, including my own, say, I will not go to my parents and say anything.
Right.
I mean, every parent has said, if you have any questions, just come to me, just ask. They're not going to do it. We have to create those moments. We have to open the door. We have to go to them and say, tell me about some changes today. Have you noticed this happening? There are books out there to help parents know what to say or how to say it. One book that I saw was called The Boy's Body Book.
Okay.
And that was one that you could use as early as 9 years old, with just explaining to that 9-year-old not what they're currently going through, but kind of opening up the door to kind of say, hey, this is what's to come.
Well, then if it's an ongoing conversation, then it becomes normal.
Right.
Like you normalize like what most kids would just, squirm at the idea of even thinking about talking to that with a parent. But like once you start that conversation at a young age and keep that going, then it's not awkward.
Right.
They're going to come to you and ask those questions.
And it is better to have that conversation and be uncomfortable beforehand than after.
Absolutely.
And I tell parents all the time, all of us, kids and adults, you start your day with an empty cup. Your kids start their day with an empty cup. And you can pour into it, or someone else is going to pour into it.
Absolutely.
And so, you just got to be the one.
Right.
You've got to be the one that they can go to, and that, you initiate all of. I think that's so important.
Right. And I think it just takes boldness and courage from parents. Like if it's awkward and uncomfortable, you're going to have to just get over it. I've had many conversations with 8th grade boys. I just picked that age just because that seems to be the kind of peak of when kids are willing to come and admit to me like, hey, I'm struggling with this. First thing I say to them is like, well, let's put some practical boundaries in place. Like, don't take your phone in your room at night. And the first thing they always say is, but it's my alarm clock. And you guys probably remember, we gave out a whole bunch of alarm clocks that cost me, I think, like $10 a piece.
Yes.
Like you can go get an old school alarm clock. If you have a teenage boy, I mean, honestly, any teenager, any child should never be alone in their room
At night with the phone.
at night with a digital device.
Yeah.
I mean, that should just be standard practice, because it's just, there's no benefit to it.
Right.
There's no win there. And with all of the dangers that we've talked about, like we have to be willing to just put those boundaries.
It's very risky
In place.
to allow it.
Right.
It's really putting children at risk to allow it. If you think of it that way, you're more likely
Absolutely.
to put a roll down.
And there are some things, and we'll make sure that, I know we've talked about a lot of different references and, the cell phone covenant and all that. So we'll put some links in the description of this video. But there are some tools out there, if you use an iPhone, I can only speak to iPhone because I don't use, Samsung or whatever the other phones are. But there are a lot of great tools within there. There's parental restrictions that you can set. There's so many things. My kids can't even download an app without me giving them permission. Now, sometimes that drives me nuts because I'm just like, just download the app. I don't want to have to put in 15 passcodes for, but you know what? It keeps them safe. But again, those can fail when there's a software update and you forget to go back and do it all. Right. There's a website or an app that's called Covenant Eyes, or there's one called Bark, that these are really excellent tools. Wes Feldner, our worship pastor here on the staff, he actually has this, and he was showing it to me. It's amazing. It has every phone in his house on it. I mean, and it kind of sends up a flag if there's any even hint of something that is questionable, inappropriate. It scans pictures coming from people, lets you know like, hey, you might have a problem. He was sharing with me as he pulled out his phone, he did get a hit and he was like, uh-oh. And it was something about like medical discussion, I think one of his kids was talking about like a twisted ankle or something like that, but it was just like one of these things where it was just like, it's even, and I'm sure you can adjust these sensitivity levels, but again, Those are great tools, and those are paid platforms. I've heard great things about them, but nothing is going to ever trump, all of this without, just being intentional.
Right.
We've got to be intentional. Yeah. We have to be engaged in our kids' lives.
Right. And you mentioning about like just that platform and everything like that, it makes me think of the school system, like our system. The students don't always realize like the computer base of whatever it uses, like monitors like their emails or anything like that. If they say anything remotely out of the ordinary, it like flags to our counselors. But sometimes they forget, and sometimes parents forget, like, oh, I'm going to ground them from their phone, but they have these Chromebooks that are issued to them.
Right.
And so they'll be like, yeah, I was grounded, but I'm emailing my friends. And I'm like, okay, but you do realize, like, the school can see those emails. Like, and sometimes they forget, and they'll send inappropriate things or things like that. But so you mentioning that made me think about that. Like, on the school side, at least parents know, like, if something occurs, it's monitored through the school, parents are contacted. Yeah.
And that's really good to know, because that's actually something that came up. I had a parent come up and say that to me. She's like, hey, they're also having conversations on these school-based platforms. So it's really neat to know that that's being monitored as well. Right. But again, these kids are smart. They will figure out a way, So, I mean, it really is important. But I guess the whole point of this discussion is to simply say this. We can recognize the dangers. We need to be wise. We need to understand the dangers. We can know kind of some of the tools on how to prevent them, but we have to know that, again, there's no magic wand that we can wave and just protect our kids. It's got to be intentional parenting. It's got to be you getting in that kid's life. You said it. Tell them who they are. Right. From a very young age, you need to tell them you are a loved child of God. You were created for a purpose. Right. And when you can have those kind of, guardrails set in a kid's life where that is something that they're constantly hearing, they're not going to need all the validation. Right. They're not going to need to feel like, well, I don't know the answers to these questions and I don't feel comfortable talking to my parents. So it really comes down to parenting your kids, because I've done it too. I remember, when iPhones and iPads were a big thing, like my wife and I were like, man, we can go out to dinner and it's awesome. I can just throw a phone in my kid's face and, and it's just, but it's so easy to fall into that and just trust that it's going to be okay. But without that level of just super intentional parenting and really opening up those doors for conversation, it all kind of falls apart.
And I think at our last time, Cece, you mentioned about like having the shutting down all like TVs and the phones and like being intentional with dinner. And growing up, like my family always did that. Like we sit down as a family, we eat, we talk. And some of my favorite memories growing up were at our kitchen table, just eating and laughing and cutting up. And even now, like we sit down as a family and like we turn off our phones, we turn off the TV. And our 2-year-old, her prayer is like, God, our Father, like the whole, toddler prayer. But just to be like, Hattie, how was your day? Like, what did you do? And of course, she's just like, I did this, or she doesn't have that much sense.
But you're programming all this.
Right. And to have these conversations, I'm like, okay, like, and being a teacher of middle schoolers, I'm like, because there are middle schoolers who you can tell like that their parents check in on them and those things. And so I'm like, okay, what did their parents do? So now that they're 14, like they respect adults or they do these things. And so I think like you've said, and we've all said, like starting at an early age, and it's not too late to start, even if they are 13 or 14 or 18.
It's never too late.
Yeah. Like even if they're about to go off to college, like it's never too late.
Never too late. Absolutely.
To start.
Yeah. As a parent, you can never get to that place where you feel like, okay, I failed and I'm throwing in the towel. You just can't.
Right. You can't.
You cannot do that, you know. So
one thing I'll share, this had not happened when we did our first discussion, but I think 2 days ago it's in social media now, and it's like viral, and it showed a teacher, substitute teacher, that got into a physical fight with a middle school student, and it was over the cell phone. These cell phones are very, very important to our kids, and it's almost like an arm or
security blanket.
Yes. I think in the last one, I also discussed parents being active members of PTA and being a part of the school. I do think that there needs to be more of a connection, a bridge needs to be established between parents and schools so that they come together and, have this clear understanding of what the guidelines are and, what the consequences are. And if we have parents that take on this, this is my child's property and, get defensive when a teacher steps in to try to enforce the rules, then we're going to have more moments like that. So I guess I'm just through this platform, I want to just ask parents to make sure you understand clearly what your school's rules are
Their
as
policies,
it relates policies are as it relates to electronics, social media usage and different things like that, so that no one is surprised with how it's going to be enforced, and talk to your child about, hey, if you're caught with it, just give it up. Let me I tell my kids, let me fight your battles. If you feel like that you've been wronged, let me be that person that goes in to speak on your behalf. Don't try to do it.
Your answer is yes, ma'am, or yes, sir. We'll figure it out after that.
That was just really disappointing and disheartening to me. Just to see that the digital world has caused that much havoc in both that child's life and that educator's life.
Well, ladies, I can't thank you enough for being here. I'd love to close in a word of prayer. If that's okay with you guys, we'll go ahead and bow our heads. Lord, just want to really thank you for the opportunity to come together today and to just share our thoughts and, our limited wisdom that we all have in our different areas. But Lord, I just thank you for the opportunity to get this information out. My prayer is for all of our parents and our teens out there that are kind of in the middle of this, that they're navigating this. Lord, my prayer is that you keep our teens safe. Lord, I pray for parents to feel encouraged and empowered through this discussion to be able to lead their kids and to set those boundaries. If they haven't done that, Lord, I pray that this would be a wake-up call to them, that they would set those boundaries. And Lord, if they do have those boundaries, I pray that you remind them they can never forget that it's a constant adjustment. The technology is changing. So many things are changing. We've got to be intentional and diligent as parents. And Lord, I pray for our even younger kids, because Lord, we know that we're seeing a generation that this has now been a part of their life since birth, which is new to a lot of us. But, we've got kids that are, 5, 6 years old that are stumbling into really dangerous things. And Lord, we are just praying for your protection over us. Lord, help us to just be wise in the way that we navigate this world. Lord, we love you. And it's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Well, thank you, ladies, so much for being here. And I'm sure we'll do this again sometime. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Thank you.